There's always an element of ignorance when it comes to nascent and emerging technologies. And what that ignorance is not necessarily derived from an incompetence on the part of the individual, but more so an impatience, a fear of missing out on this new emerging opportunity. This is a delicate balance, right? And it's no stranger to the space of DeFi, where for the first time ever, we have new wealth preservation and creation opportunities open to small to medium institutions. However, there's a whole heap of precautions and risks associated with not only accessing, but storing and having activity in this space as well. So, especially now, more timely than ever, in light of crypto crackdowns in the US and the recent Black Swan events with the managed custodial players in this space, such as FTX, BlockFi, and Celsius, we've deemed it necessary to take our audience through the ins and outs of managing, storing, and securing digital assets as an institution, and I guess a sort of checklist on how to mitigate the risk of a crackdown on crypto on any given institution or individual. So with me to discuss this is someone who has the depth of experience and insight and technical knowledge to take us through that journey, and that's Uzyn, the CTO and co-founder of CakeDeFi, who's not only a leader in the institutional space, currently serving 1 million plus users when it comes to DeFi, but also a leading pioneer in this space, someone who was present on the Satoshi forums back in the day and has been in the crypto space since day one as an individual. And we'll be taking you through these steps one by one so that you, by the end of this podcast, will have a clearer understanding and a deeper insight on protecting digital assets as an institution. So Uzyn, amidst current news stories, what we've clearly seen around the world is what seems to be a crackdown on crypto in general, and battle lines being drawn between federal governments and reserves and institutions and individuals using crypto. As someone who's a leader of an institution in this space, is that a fear that you also have? Is it something that's been on your mind in recent, I guess, months?
It's definitely something that's been on our minds. We run CakeDeFi. We have customers' fund on our custody. And with the recent trend that we're seeing in the space right now, that the government is trying to probably take a little bit of opportunistic there to kind of make use of that uncertainty in the economy to try to crack down a bit on that crypto. We see that happening in various jurisdictions around the world. So I think it's the time right now where to really start to think about on how to really secure your crypto, or how to secure your asset to be it's completely on your own and not having to rely on someone else. And if there's any asset in the world that you can do that, crypto is the best one out there, because all other assets in the world, you always have a counterparty. And crypto has always been invented at the start to have that financial control in your own hand and without having to rely on anyone. But the trend that we've seen in the past couple of years is that to make it easier for institutions to get into crypto, a lot of them take shortcuts and take like some compromise to make it easier to get into cryptos. And then that affects the whole, like controlling your own keys and controlling your own coins, and that allows it easier for the governments and jurisdiction to take control or seize assets, even in some cases, into what should have been out of reach for them in the first place.
So it seems like there's this sort of ignorance around the infrastructure. So theoretically, crypto is, it's untouchable, right? You're holding your own keys, but there's an infrastructure play on how to store those assets, transact in the broader financial market, and that's where they can be people can be caught out because they have a fear of missing out, and they just want to get into it. They just see the financial opportunity, but not so much the infrastructure weaknesses, such as what we've seen in the US, like the crackdown on crypto-friendly banks, etc. So, how important is that infrastructure piece? And I think we're going to go into that today to outline a checklist on how to make sure that that is secure. But in general, is that something you've kept in mind since the beginning of CakeDeFi?
It's something that's been in my mind, not just the beginning of CakeDeFi, but in the beginning from even when I started crypto, when I started to get into the journey of Bitcoin. Even before then, I was in cybersecurity. I was thinking about you controlling your own data, you not having to trust anyone with your own private data. It's that thing that keeps me into doing this whole thing. And so when we first started CakeDeFi, we always started with that mission that if the customer is entrusted their fund with us, it's it's in us to make sure that it's safe and also make it transparent that everything can be tracked. And if you turn our role into institutions, providing a service for institutions, then it's our job to make sure that institutions are able to control fully their crypto assets and not having to rely on anyone else, including us. Like we just provide a service for you to be able to control that on your own, and not having to like rely on like us to make sure that we're in control of your crypto, because that should not be the case in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's the right attitude to have, because you see in the US right now, there's literally a clear division, and even in the broader financial markets, there's clear division between governments or administrations who want to push the adoption of crypto and those who don't want it because they see it as an underlying threat to the current financial system. So there's no doubt in anyone's mind that it's uncertain times in terms of overreach into the assets institution might have. So with that in mind, what we're going to do today, as I mentioned in the introduction, is go through a step-by-step process as to, how to protect those assets and what you have to keep in mind, what's the checklist you have to keep in mind, and how, if there was an organization or an external body, how they would overreach and involuntarily take your assets as an institution in this space. So let's start with the first step. I think this one's one we can both talk about is the jurisdiction. Now, you're obviously headquartered in Singapore, and I'm sure there was some reasoning behind that as well. And broadly, Singapore is known as a very crypto-friendly country, which is great for any institution in this space. But what other things about Singapore do you like, and why do you favor it over perhaps other jurisdictions?
Singapore, first, is my home, and secondly, I think that with the things that Singapore has done the past decades or so, even from the founding of Singapore, like Singapore has always operated on a very meritocratic-based decision making all the way from day one. And with the things that we've seen with Singapore doing the past 10 years or so, not just in finance, but everything that Singapore's been doing is always taking a very balanced approach into every decision making. Like they don't rush, we don't rush into making quick decisions and things that are just knee-jerk reaction on certain things. And with that approach, Singapore has seen a boom in tech in general. We've seen a lot of tech companies moving their headquarters to Singapore because it's like I would even call it like the headquarters of Asia, because we're pretty much westernized in a way, and we're also very friendly towards we have jurisdiction that's very friendly towards many tech-based company. And in terms of crypto, we've seen like Singapore is also kind of like in a way headquarters of cryptos of the world for the past few years. Now, it's debatable between Dubai and Singapore, but then I still prefer Singapore, because we always make sure that the things that we do here, Singapore that Singapore is doing, is that you always weighs the pros and cons into every single decision making and don't rush into doing things. And Singapore has always been taking a very balanced approach in we don't take sides with countries, and the recent conflicts of various US-China conflicts. Singapore is always taking a very balanced stance in this. We don't side each one of them. I think with that approach, it's where we think that Singapore is a great place to set up a company like CakeDeFi and CakeDeFi Enterprise so to be offered from here, because it allows us to have the safest way to make sure that our customers' asset and our clients' asset are safe and out of reach from jurisdiction.
So it's a relatively neutral environment, is what you're saying, which obviously means a long-term stability. And I guess as an institution, if you were to warn off other institutions or give a little bit of advice to other institutions in this space who are perhaps asset managers, managing digital assets, or just generic traders, just managing digital assets on the balance sheet in general, you would suggest that a place like Singapore would be the best option for long-term neutral stability in this current environment?
I agree 100%. It's also clear from the trend that we've seen in the past that we see a lot of crypto companies and digital asset companies, family funds setting up offices in Singapore. I believe strongly that reason is because Singapore has this very good neutral stance, and you have the more predictable future if you choose a country like a jurisdiction that's like Singapore.
And I guess that we've seen the effect the government attitude can have when it comes to institutions in crypto. There's been like other examples where there's been changes in Hong Kong, for instance, and the recent sentiment in the US where it can literally turn the market upside down overnight, and then vice versa. And you're right, we haven't really seen that here yet in Singapore. And I guess, as you put it, that goes towards their meritocratic way of coming to a decision and not rushing into anything. But they've also been involved in a few government projects as well. It seems like the monetary authority here is actually interested in pursuing crypto and blockchain technology projects in general too, which is a good sign.
Yeah, they are. I think MAS has always been looking to various projects like Project Orchid and some CBDC that Singapore has been trying to experiment with for the longest time. And also the fact that I want to point out is that, they've always been very open to have conversations with companies that are in the space. So for us at CakeDeFi, our team has always been in talks with the regulators on just to give maybe not anything in particular, but just kind of give them updates on things. They always consult us. Gives they always want to know what's happening on the ground before they do certain drastic changes that affect everything. And with this stance, I think it's why Singapore has always been so cautious in doing anything that's drastic. And we've seen, like you correctly point out, that so many things has changed all of a sudden all around the world without any warnings. Just things has changed in weeks. And yeah, so Singapore, I think it's a perfect place for that.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good segue on to the next point, because once you've got jurisdiction covered, but let's go with a dire situation of an external body or an organization extremely negative toward crypto, right? So you got the first step, which is, okay, are you in a jurisdiction? Second step can actually be the crackdown on the actual infrastructure that you use as an institution managing digital assets. And so the most common one is the type of custody, right? So custody became a bit of a buzzword back when we saw these black swan events with FTX and Celsius and BlockFi, whereby the term managed custody became a bit of a negative term. A lot of people lost their assets because of the internal negligence of those companies and the lack of transparency of those companies. People didn't really know where their assets were. So third-party custody versus self-custody, as an institution, what approach would you take?
Self-custody, definitely. I think if you can choose anything, I would choose for self-custody. If you run a business in the space, you want to make sure that you do not get caught off guard by being one of the falling dominoes from one of the large custodian providers because they fail, and then you don't do anything wrong, you do everything correctly, and yet you get caught because they have no liquidity to allow you to get your funds back. So that would be really, really bad if you want to run a business. So if you are in the space and you have the ability to, crypto asset is designed to allow you access to be able to control it on your own in the first place. So make use of that. And if you can choose the right partner, choose the right technology to allow you to have access to your crypto and control it entirely on your own, and making sure that it's safe as well, so that you don't be one of the falling dominoes. For FTX cases, we've seen so many other smaller funds and hedge funds that got caught because they had their funds on FTX, and they're doing everything correctly. They have all the internal policy checks and making sure the funds are not investing in any weird bad protocols and stuff like that. But then yet you get caught by just being one of those pieces. So it's tough.
It's not their own fault. There's that. Yeah. There's risks, and one of them is the counterparty risk, which is
exactly.
Okay, you're doing everything right as you mentioned, but then the fault of the actual infrastructure provider led to the loss of your assets, which is obviously terrible. But so self-custody allows this to mitigate that counterparty risk, right? And then that also gives a bit of accountability and responsibility to the institution. So I guess tools in that space are becoming much more popular because once they are able to easily and securely manage their own assets, then that risk of external fraud or external negligence or mismanagement of assets is completely mitigated. So I guess let's just to keep bringing it down to a checklist. You got jurisdiction, and you check that off. Make sure you're in an area that's quite crypto friendly. Secondly, you've got the type of custody. You've got your managed custody or third-party custody versus self-custody, and then opting in for self-custody to ensure that you're mitigating those risks of an external agent coming in and taking those assets. Now let's assume you've got both those in place, right? So you've got your jurisdiction and you're using a self-custodial approach. Now we get into your domain, especially like there's a deeper technological layer here. And I think what you've got to talk on this topic is actually quite unique in the market. But you've actually got the wallet type. Custody tech is a combination of different modules. And one of those modules is the wallet, right? Where you're actually storing those assets and receiving assets. And you've got a few types of wallets. But you have a bit of insight into those types of wallets and the I guess, underlying risks and advantages of each. And do you want to go through, you've got your typical MPC and your multi-sig wallet. Do you want to go through that?
Sure. So crypto is designed to be retail focused from day one. So it started with only single sig from the early days, and then sometime around, I think, second or third year of Bitcoin, where multi-sig capability was added to Bitcoin protocol itself, because as the value of Bitcoin grows, its holders want to make sure that there's a lot more a control over who has access to that particular wallet. So the multi-sig, it's there to make sure that that's.
So when you say single sig, it's only one signature, access to your assets. That's all you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, and then that went to multi-sig, which means you might need two.
Exactly.
In place.
Yeah. So like 2 out of 3 to sign, or 3 out of 4, or 2 out of 5 to sign even. So you can set all of that on the Bitcoin protocol itself. So this is on the consensus layer itself on Bitcoin. So there's no way to go around that.
Okay.
It's basically on the consensus layer. You can see that there's like 2 out of 5 addresses that need to sign. Any of those 2 can sign off, and no one else can sign off. And all that signatures goes on the blockchain as well. So you can audit that. You can see that that's the case. And there's no other way the fund could be released without going to the blockchain. So multi-signatory is very low level. If you talk about tech, so you have high level where you have like you have scripting language, and you have like back end, and you have like internal, and then you have the low level, which is the most basic layer, where it's almost impossible to change anything on that low level. So you're talking about, in this case, the consensus layer of the blockchain itself, where it protects the wallet to make sure that the wallet is not accessible by anyone external. So that's a multi-sig technology we've been seeing around for more than 10 years now, from the Bitcoin early days. And then, so a lot of the early days solutions for institutions revolve around multi-sig wallet, because institution requires that for internal risk and controls perspective, you need to make sure that wallets are not accessible only by one single individual. You need to be controlled by multiple parties to make sure everything is protected. A lot of initial days of custodian providers revolve around there. It's hard to build on a consensus layer, because it's just like it's hard to build around there. And then sometime, I would say around probably like 3 or 4 years back, where we do see an emergence of MPC technology, a multi-party compute technology. So what there was designed, because multi-sig, it's on the consensus layer, it is very hard to build around it. And also the fact that multi-sig is very different from one chain to the other. If you multi-sig on Bitcoin,
goes into it.
Yes. Yep. Multi-sig on Bitcoin is very different from multi-sig on Ethereum. It's very different from multi-sig from another blockchain. And you have to implement basically for every single blockchain very differently, and also to make sure that it is safe. So there's a trend about 3 or 4 years back from some of the custodian providers kind of say, can we take a retail approach, the single signatory address, cut it somehow, and split across multiple parties so that it can be used in a way that's still multi-party, but on-chain is single address. So that's what the industry term MPC technology.
Okay.
But I mean, the thing about that is that you have this tool that you are able to do the fundamental safest way for multiple parties to control an address, but you're taking the easy way out to use a single one, and then you cut it in a way so that you spread the keys around.
Yep.
So the upside of that is that single signatory key is actually very similar across multiple blockchain, because it's just private key and it's just PKI, public key infrastructure. Yeah, private key, you cut around private key somehow, spread across multiple servers, and you can sign basically a transaction on any blockchain. So it allows the provider to be able to expand faster by taking in my opinion, a compromise on the security because like that keys now are residing above the fundamental layer of the blockchain. So it resides across multiple servers if the providers are doing exactly what they claim
as well, right? In some instances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are centralized. It has to be centralized.
Exactly.
It has to be centralized. It cannot actually be decentralized. And also the fact that these keys, even though they're spread around, there's no way for an external party to audit that that's the case because it's completely invisible from any external observer.
Okay.
The keys are, you can just read the paper, you can just trust that they do it correctly. If they do it correctly, that's good. If they don't, it's too bad because there's no way for an external party to prove that. Whereas for multi-signatory technology, you can see there on chain that it's the case and you can prove that your funds are safe that way. So what I want to really emphasize, the takeaway is that you want to make sure that, I mean, in this industry, like when everything's working fine, it's fine. No one asks anything. When things fall, people start to ask, why didn't you audit that? Why didn't you audit that? So before things fall, before things start to go wrong, make sure that you are able to see how your wallets, how your crypto assets are actually signed on chain, how you can track them, how they are actually handled, how the security is handled. Make sure that don't just take the word for it. Don't just take your own certification for that because that's like you don't see that in even certification. You don't see that in real. Like you need to see that yourself. If hire like someone that you can audit from your end as an institution to make sure that your funds are safe. That's the best way to go around on managing crypto assets. And multi-sig technology is what's allowing companies and institutions to audit that your funds are safe.
It sounds like there's a recurring trade-off, which we discussed in the intro, which is basically your convenience factor and entering something without fully understanding the intricacies of the technology you're using versus, okay, I have to take full accountability. And yeah, it may be a bit more effort, it may be a bit more tedious, but it's extremely secure. And it's the same with custody tech, and it's the same with anything, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you may have to be a self-custodian, which means the responsibility is on you. It may be a bit different, it may not be as quick but the upside is you know where your assets are, and you know you can protect them in the case of a dire situation.
So I add one more thing as well, like MPC, to a point where even the marketing around it was so extreme to a point where we even see some of the users in the space actually prefer MPC than multi-sig because just think that it's a newer approach and it's safer. Actually, it is not. You're taking the simpler approach to try to break it down somehow, do some magic around it, just kind of make sure that it's safe. But there's no way to audit that.
But the other thing you brought up once in a discussion internally was around how it's actually a bit more easier for the engineers and for the business to put out an MPC that's providing it, but it's not necessarily more secure for the end user, which I think is a really distinct thing that the market doesn't necessarily know.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Yeah, I personally believe the MPC was designed by an engineering team because it's easier. It's a common engineers when you try to design that we call abstraction layer that works across multiple things that you support. The common layer across multiple blockchains are that single sig address, signatory address. It's the same across across all blockchains in the world today. And engineers would say, let's take that and let's apply it to institution. Let's break down that single sig private key and break it down to MPC. And it's with that approach that MPC I strongly believe that it's designed to be that, and then the marketing team works around that. Okay, let's just push it out. That's
easier, it's more convenient, Yeah,
and there's no way to audit that. There's no way to make sure that it's safe.
And they don't say what's the trade-off. Yeah, exactly. It's not. The devil's in the details with that one. So, I guess with that, I mean, I think the clear thing, apart from as you mentioned, the transparency, the auditability, the fact that it's actually stored on a centralized server, the single idea, or the idea that there is a single signature instance when it comes to MPC, I think isn't well known in the industry for those who are users. Probably very well known amongst the providers, but when a user actually finds out, well, actually there's a single sig instance and it's visible to the provider in some instances, the chances of there being a deep crackdown and forcing the hand of those technology providers to reveal that, or if there was an external fraudulent case or a hack or whatever it may be, that single key instance can be revealed and those assets reached.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me illustrate it a little bit more graphically. So if an institution uses a multi-sig technology, multi-sig wallet, multi-signatory wallet, let's say the institution owns like one or two out of those keys, and if there's another third party, like could be government, could be, I don't know, like law enforcement, could be some other theft or something that goes into your company, tries to steal your fund. Like all you have to do is to make sure that those keys are never exposed and never get stolen, and you're safe because there's no way for them for the other third party to be able to access your crypto. But for MPC, how it works is that even if that keys are split across servers, all three servers have to be online at all times. You cannot take any one of them offline and expect to work. They are all active signing. So how the custodian technology provider built around that is that by introducing a policy layer around those three servers that make sure that like any instruction that goes into those three servers to sign, they have to come from this policy engine. And this policy engine, I mean, in a more common term, would be like a UI where company users will log into to say, I approve this fund, and I wanna initiate this fund to move this account and all that. I want to send it to someone. So it's basically wrapped around the UI. Behind the UI is the policy engine to make sure that once approved by certain parties in your company, and then it gets sent to that one of those three servers to say, okay, now that policy engine has approved it, let's sign it, and then let's push it over to the blockchain. On the blockchain, what the blockchain sees, one is a single sig address, and what these three servers are taking is just anything that goes past that policy engine, they're going to sign it because they have no visibility on what's going on that UI layer, which means that if I'm a government that wants to stop the company, want to cease access to the company, what I would do, instead of going after the company to ask them to split up the private keys, I'm going to go with the custodian provider and say, there's a warrant for this company. I'm going to issue one instruction for through this policy engine to say that, please send all this fund to my control. And the company does not even have to be aware of that because it's all wrapped around this soft policy engine. All they have to do is just go to that custodian provider and say, send instruction, all the fund will come to me. And that is able
all they
to
have to do is go to the provider.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. They don't necessarily
MPC allows to do that.
They don't necessarily have to go to the owner of those assets.
Exactly.
The provider's enough. But in the multi-sig instance, you got to go to the owner.
It's not possible. It's not possible.
That's a pretty distinct advantage. So I think it's just great marketing on the part of MPC.
Yeah,
in that
bringing
case.
back the
and it's when you have only a few
for multi-sig.
Right, but when you only have a few providers, that's going to be the case because they would dominate the marketing scene at the end of the day. So
and they move really fast because it's a common layer.
It's at least good to open up the discussion to critically analyze both, right? Now, okay, let's go to another. This one's probably a bit I wouldn't say extreme, but it's like not many people would have thought of this. Now, if we talk about jurisdiction handled, self-custody versus managed custody, and then we just did the wallet type MPC versus multi-sig. That's a checklist so far. The last one would be actually an external body targeting the cloud providers or the cloud providers that are providing the front and back end, right? Infrastructure and support. I think you would probably be an opinion leader on this particular risk. So how about you talk to us like what it's meant by, for those who aren't technologically savvy, a cloud provider, and what the different type of provisions are and what the risks are entailed with each of those.
Yep. So with the kind of like the popularity of cloud systems the last decade or so, we've seen a trend of a lot of software that used to sit on desktop computers or servers in the offices and now move to the cloud. And what that happens is that a lot of them sits in the same cloud. Like a lot of the companies,
multi-tenant cloud, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Before we get there, like a lot of the services now just sit on, for instance, like email. A lot of us is using Gmail, for instance, or they're sitting on Google server, and that server or that a cluster of servers. They serve not only your company, but also serve for all companies that under their control. And what that happens is that there's a chance. Wait, let me take a step back. So before that, like every individual, every companies want to control their own data. You don't want to share that. Like even that idea, like 2 decades back, even that idea to float around with the company to say that, oh, your data is going to sit in the same server instance with the rest of the company's data, you will feel so insecure about that because like, why am I putting my data with other servers, and what if there's contamination, what if there's leak? It's very uncertain about this whole thing. But with the whole cloud computing, this guardrail, it takes up more and more of a norm thing now for companies to do that. And we see that in email, we've seen that on like task management systems, and like a lot of systems that we use day in and day out are all sit on a multi-tenancy cloud, because it's like for your company side, like it's okay now, it's more acceptable now, but on a provider side, it makes a lot more sense because it's a lot of cost saving. You don't have to spin up every single server for every single customer. You just have them share the same server. It's a lot easier to maintain as well. But if you talk about crypto assets, same thing. So we want to make sure that it has the strongest way to make sure that you control your crypto assets, not any governments, not any third party, certainly not your custodian tech provider as well. So for what we design, CakeDeFi Enterprise, I mean, it's one of the checklists that you want to make sure as well, if you want to really make sure that you control your own crypto, is that ask for the possibility of running your own custodian tech in your own cloud instance, or even if your own server, if possible. So CakeDeFi Enterprise, we always design that from day one, that we allow customers to be able to run their own cloud DeFi enterprise instance on their own cloud account, completely separate from any other customers of enterprise from our side. So you don't see, there's no chance of any data contamination. There's no chance of any, I don't know, like a government shutdown or any AWS account, because if they go after one specific account, then only that account is affected and not yours. And you don't want to be that domino that other people are falling in, therefore you're just being dragged along.
In that instance, an external government body would go to the cloud provider and say, okay, they're all on this multi-tenant solution, exactly. And that's where the custody solution is hosted. And so they wouldn't need to go to these individual instances. But beyond that, what you're saying is having the ability to spin up that single instance also allows you to move to a different jurisdiction too. And so it also allows you to, for instance, if you are hosted in the US, for instance, but you're seeing this inevitable crackdown, you can spin up another instance in a more crypto-friendly jurisdiction, which would also mean it would be out of the reach of those external entities as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Like you don't, like, one thing I want to like really illustrate as well, like you don't want to be that falling domino pieces. Let's say there's a custodian tech provider that has like maybe 20 accounts in there or 100 accounts in there, and there's a whale there that controls like 90% of that account, and the government is going after that one account, and they shut down the whole cloud, and now the rest of the 19 or like 99 gets affected because of that one single account, and you don't want to be that falling domino because of that.
Still that idea of like a centralized single point of failure, right?
Yes.
If multi-tenancy on that cloud could be a single point of failure, because one of them goes down, you all go down, essentially.
Exactly.
And they're going to go after the larger bunch as opposed to the single instances.
Yep.
And also,
more effective. Yeah.
Makes a lot
more
sense.
jurisdiction. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to summarize and then we'll end the podcast today. So we are releasing a research paper which outlines everything we've spoken about with a bit more detail, but I think you've given a great simplified overview and on some levels a deeper technical insight into the risks associated with managing digital assets as an institution. But I mean, in summary, what we've got here is a pretty comprehensive checklist. So if you are pursuing digital asset management in this space as an institution, yes, there's a heap of opportunity of wealth creation and wealth preservation opportunities in this space, but don't compromise on the technical intricacies and don't forget to look at the general expanded jurisdictions that you are operating in as well. So thank you very much for taking us through that today. And yeah, I hope we can talk more about this at a later time.
Thank you, Sidney. Thank you.
Just a key takeaway for those watching, we do have a full research paper which basically details this out in a much more comprehensive manner. There will be a link in the description to download that. thank you all for watching the DeFi Unlocked podcast, and we will continue to bring experts in the space on to sort of delineate, I guess, not only how to protect yourself in this space as an institution managing digital assets, but also really take up the opportunity that's available as we speak. So thank you for joining, and feel free to join us for the next one in a fortnight's time.